Hello, friends. While I'm taking a little time away to enjoy life as it's happening, I've chosen a few episodes from the Virg Vault that I thought were worth revisiting. Welcome to Rewind on the Verge, a chance to return to an earlier conversation, story, or maybe an adventure that still feels meaningful today. I'll be back soon with plenty to catch up on. Until then, I hope you enjoyed this rewind. While I'm taking time away, I wanted to bring back episode 100, the first 100, and what comes next. As I step into a new chapter in my life, this felt like the perfect episode to revisit. It's about how the podcast evolved as I evolved, what the first 100 episodes taught me, and what I hope to carry forward. Now, some things have changed since I recorded it, and some of the lessons feel even more meaningful now. So, from the Virg Vault, here is episode 100. Hey everybody, welcome back to Living on the Verge. I was sitting here thinking about how to start this, and the only thing that kept coming to mind was, I can't believe this is episode 100. When I started this podcast almost a year ago, and the 1-year anniversary is actually coming up soon, by the way, I didn't have a big plan. I just watched a lot of reality TV, had a lot of opinions, and I thought maybe it would be fun to talk about it somewhere. The very first episode was about Karen Huger going to jail. Remember that? And $1,000 baked potato on the Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which still makes me laugh now because that really tells you everything about where this started. At the beginning, the podcast was really just me talking about things I was excited about. Bravo, covering all the shows, making sure I had all the tea, taking trips, events, going places, saying yes to things. Things like West Hollywood weekends, cooking classes, filming events, travel, moments with my son and grandson and my nephew that actually ended up meaning so much more than I realized at the time. Then there was Europe. Oh, a trip of a lifetime. And honestly, one of the biggest gifts of that experience was the friendships that came out of it. I thought the podcast was about where I was going and what I was doing. And somehow along the way, and I don't think I noticed it while it was happening, but it started to feel different. Now, listen, nothing bad happened. There wasn't one moment where I decided to change anything. But I remember coming home from BravoCon and just feeling tired in a way that kind of surprised me. Not tired of the podcast and not even tired of the shows. Are you kidding me? I love the shows. But tired of feeling like I had to watch everything with a notepad and an agenda and a schedule. Life had started to kind of become content instead of just being my life. And I think that's when something quietly shifted. Over the last couple of months, if you've been listening, you probably noticed the episodes started changing a little bit. I was talking more about slowing down, clarity, decluttering, alignment, friendships, expectations. And at the time, I didn't really think of it as a direction. I think I was just trying to understand where I was in my own life, in my own real daily moment while I was talking through it out loud with you. And when I went back and I looked at the first 100 episodes recently, what I really found that actually kind of surprised me wasn't how much the show changed. It was realizing that the podcast kind of changed when I did. I didn't sit down and decide to stop recapping or make it a more reflective podcast. I think I just stopped wanting the podcast to feel like homework. I still love Bravo. I mean, the new Valley Persian style is so good, and it has led me down this rabbit hole of binging the Shahs of Sunset. And I still love pop culture. It's not lost on me that pop culture has clashed with sports, has clashed with politics, has clashed with current events, a la Bad Bunny at the Super Bowl. And so, my people, I still love all of it, but I wanted this space to feel like real life again. Like sitting at the kitchen counter, having a conversation, maybe with a cup of coffee, instead of performing something. So episode 100 isn't really a big announcement or a pivot or anything like that. It's more just me taking a minute to look back and say, okay, this is where we started. This is what changed. And this is where I am right now. I don't fully know what the next 100 episodes look like yet. But I do know that I still love sitting down and doing this. And I know I want the show to keep feeling real. The fun parts, the messy parts, and whatever they're trying to teach me while I'm paying attention. So today, it's just going to be a little bit of that, looking back, talking about what surprised me, and maybe saying thank you a little bit along the way. When I started looking back at the first 100 episodes, what surprised me was how many moments I had forgotten about until I saw the titles again. And it reminded me that this podcast has really just kind of followed my life in real time. Even when I was covering reality TV 24/7, I always found myself including real life things, recipes, little tips, everyday moments. Because it mattered to me that it be more than just a recap podcast. There were the fun, chaotic moments at the beginning, like the West Hollywood weekend, checking into the hotel, the anticipation of meeting up with and connecting with like-minded people. Then there were the filming events and those early episodes where everything felt new and exciting. And I was saying yes to basically everything because I didn't know what this was going to become yet. And I think you can hear that energy in those episodes. And honestly, the rookiness of it all too. It was very much, let's just go see what happens. The travel episodes, they stand out for me too. The Arizona trip, for me, when I think about it, the real takeaway was realizing my son, my baby, is doing well. He's thriving, living a good life, and that I didn't have to worry about him the way I once did. The day in Sedona was a day where things happened that I could have reported on for the podcast, but the memories that were made that day were the real gift. And then Europe later on that summer, for me, just priceless, but not for the reasons you might think. It was a beautiful trip, of course. It was a moment in my life that I wouldn't exchange. But not just because of where I was, but because of the beautiful friendships that were made and those that were solidified. So for me, those episodes felt different because I wasn't really trying to make content. I was just sharing experiences. And looking back now, I think that's when the show felt the most natural without me realizing it at the time. For example, the taco crawl episode with Corey, it still makes me smile because it felt like old life and new life kind of colliding a bit. Going back to places that meant something and realizing how much life changes without you noticing. I really am hoping, I really would just love to do more things like that because those moments feel intentional in a different way. There's so much territory there, and that's the part that feels so exciting. And then there were moments that mattered for different reasons. Having my first guest on felt like a big deal at the time. Kellyanne was a terrific guest, and I'd still love to have her back someday. I think it would be great to have her come back and talk about her time on The Real World. But I think maybe at the time, I thought it gave the show credibility. The Innocence Center episodes were very important to me because they reminded me that the podcast could be about more than entertainment. It could get serious and talk about things that mattered and causes I believe in without heading into politics or getting controversial. It was a moment where it felt grown and legitimate. And even things like BravoCon, which at the time felt complicated, were important because they forced me to ask myself what I actually wanted this to be. I think I assumed access meant success. And somewhere along the way, I realized that wasn't really what I wanted long term. You guys, that's the part I didn't expect when I started doing all of this. I thought the memorable moments would be the events or the access or the big things. But honestly, the moments that stayed with me were the ones where something shifted internally and I didn't realize it until later. Like coming home from something that's supposed to feel exciting and realizing, okay, but I'm just glad to be home. Or noticing I was enjoying dinner with friends more than taking notes about what I was going to talk about later. Being at a winery or an event with people I care about and realizing that what life had just handed me probably mattered more than whatever I was going to go home and watch and afterward report on for the podcast. And that's when living on the Verge quietly became less about documenting my life and more about just paying attention to it. There was this moment late in the fall when all of this kind of became obvious to me. My husband and I, were out with our friends at one of our favorite local wineries, and it was a really random get together. We were sitting around on a weekend, hanging out, doing nothing in particular, and one person texted the other person, I can't remember who, but before you know it, we were saying, hey, let's meet and, have a glass of wine. And we got up, we threw on casual clothes. It wasn't a big deal. And we headed down to our favorite winery, or one of our favorite wineries. Okay, I'm just going to say it. It was Marshall Stewart Winery. I love you, Marshall Stewart. And so, yes, we headed down to Marshall Stewart. We met our friends and we had very low expectations. We were just there to do our wine pickup and maybe have a couple of glasses of wine. We had the very best time. The vibe was casual, calm. We just felt so comfortable. And I remember the weather was beautiful. So we went outside after a little while. And then we decided, well, honestly, we need to go eat. And we agreed to head over for sushi. And it was such a random and unplanned evening that the sushi tasted extra yummy. The price tag wasn't, in the 3 digits, which is not something that usually happens when 2 couples head out to dinner. And honestly, it was just one of the most fun, amazing memories for me. And I remember sitting there in the moment at one point while everyone was just kind of chatting and thinking, this right here, this is it. That was a moment for me where I realized that life was good and I was happy and I was relishing and living in that very moment. And somewhere in all of that, probably toward the end of the year, things started to shift a little bit for me. I kept feeling pulled toward holiday prep and family time and being with my friends, and less toward feeling like I needed to record or take notes. And it wasn't dramatic. There wasn't a moment where I thought, I'm done with this. It was much quieter than that. I remember coming home from BravoCon feeling emotional for maybe a minute and then feeling relieved, which surprised me. I wasn't just chomping at the bit to podcast about it or recount every detail of the weekend. Everybody had already done that. There were endless loops of stories and tea about what had happened and who had done what. And honestly, for me, I just felt calm. Like, maybe this doesn't have to look the way I thought it did. Nothing was wrong. I want to reassure you and myself of that. Everyone was actually doing exactly what they were there to do. There was so much coverage of that event, hundreds of podcasters alone, and it all started to sound the same everywhere you listened. It got me to realize that the energy around it didn't really match where I was in my life anymore. There was a moment at a podcaster's mixer where I remember thinking, are these my people? I could have mingled more than I did. And at the time I thought, I'm in the middle of maybe missing an opportunity. But I was also okay with that. And I didn't really understand the weight of that moment until much, much later. The part that was harder wasn't the shift itself. It was actually the fear that slowing down or changing the direction would cost me all the momentum. Most of the podcasts that I had listened to were like pop culture, reality recaps. That was just the space that I understood. So when I stopped watching TV with a notepad and an agenda and a plan, I genuinely didn't know what space I fit into anymore. And sometimes I still don't. It was uncomfortable for a little while. I remember thinking, maybe I was making this smaller. Maybe I'm stepping away from something instead of towards something that I've been working towards. But what ended up happening instead was the show just kind of followed my life. I started talking about clarity and slowing down. And then the closet reset happened, which ended up leaving space for even more realizations, decluttering, alignment, friendships, all the things that were actually happening in my life, in my world, in real time. And I didn't realize it until recently. Those episodes were all connected. I was just trying to make sense of where I was. And you were kind of along for the ride. And strangely, that's when the podcast started to feel the most like itself again. Not bigger, not louder, just more honest. After all this happened, I had this moment of uncertainty. You look at your analytics and they start to get in your head. Reality TV has a way of constantly providing content. So the notion that you have to worry about the uncertainty, it's kind of becomes an issue. And then I happen to have been on a really good Instagram arc. And again, you look at the insights and it can get into your head because you do things differently. And, you wonder if it's the right thing, if you're on the right path. And one of the most frightening, raw moments for me was sitting down to record in 2026 for the very first time without notes. There was the fear that I was going to lose listeners. I didn't anticipate the kind of pressure this might add. I wasn't relying on the reality TV shows anymore for content. So now my life is the spotlight. Do I have enough to compel people? That provides a certain amount of uncertainty that, to be honest, really kind of was a moment of pause for me. And I had to be okay with just giving you who I am. And that kind of brings me to now, to episode 100. This probably isn't the version of episode 100 that I imagined when I first started. I think I assumed if I ever made it this far, which that's a whole other conversation, I'd have everything figured out. A big guest, maybe a viral moment, some clear next step that made everything make sense. And the truth is, I don't have that. And that comes with a little fear too. What I do have is a much clearer understanding of why I sit down and do this in the first place. I like the conversations. I like noticing things in real life and talking about them out loud with you. I like that this space has slowly become less about performing and more about just paying attention to what's working, what isn't, what changes as life changes. I still love Bravo. I still love pop culture. That part of me did not go anywhere. I just don't want it to feel like homework anymore. I want to feel like life first and the podcast and recap second. And I like knowing I still have the freedom to talk about those things when I want to. And strangely, that feels more exciting to me than trying to force a direction. Because for the first time since I started, I feel like the show can grow in a way that actually fits my life instead of competing with it. So if you've been here for a long time, you probably noticed the changes before I did. I had a lot of encouragement early on from regular listeners, and honestly, that helped me more than you probably know. So thank you. And if you're newer, this is probably the most accurate, honest, and raw version of what living on the verge actually is. Just paying attention to real life, the fun parts, the messy parts, and whatever they're trying to teach me along the way. And I don't know exactly what the next 100 episodes look like yet, but I do know that I'm excited to find out. And I think what feels different now is how recording actually feels. In the beginning, I felt like something had to happen before I could sit down and record. There had to be news, or something big had to have happened, a headline, or something that I had to react to. And now it's kind of the opposite. I sit down after life happens and figure out what actually mattered. I don't always have notes anymore. And strangely, it's been rather freeing. It means I'm not chasing headlines or trying to keep up with everything or anything for that matter. It leaves more space for actually living life and then just kind of noticing things afterward instead of trying to turn everything into content in real time. That's just too much pressure. And life has gotten a little quieter because of that. But also a lot more enjoyable. What's exciting to me right now is these stories are coming from real moments again. A dinner with friends can turn into a conversation that sticks with you. Book club might become an unexpected discussion that lingers way longer than the book itself. Wine club somehow turned into its own little thing with winos on the verge, and none of that was planned. It just happened naturally. What a beautiful thing. And I think that's the part that feels the most right. I don't feel like I have to decide ahead of time what this show is supposed to be anymore. It gets to grow alongside my life instead of competing with it. And the feedback lately has really meant a lot too. When people say they're slowing down a little or decluttering or paying attention a little differently because of something we talked about here, that's been really reassuring. You guys, thank you. It makes you realize connection matters more than growth spikes or numbers ever could. And in a strange way, it actually feels a little like the beginning again, just calmer. Before I wrap this up, I do want to say one thing. It still surprises me that anyone chooses to spend any time here with me. Some of you have been listening since the very beginning, back when this was just an idea, a microphone, and me figuring it out as I went. At one point, simply making it past episode 8 felt like the goal, because statistics say that most podcasts don't make it that far. And so that was my unit of measure. And somehow, here we are at episode 100. Wow. Some of you found the show later, somewhere in the middle of all of this. Either way, you guys, I don't take that lightly. This podcast started as something fun, something I thought I would try and see what happened. Like, what do I have to lose? And somewhere along the way, it honestly became something I really care about, not because of numbers or growth or any of that, but because of the connection, the messages, the conversations, the moment where someone says, I felt that too. That part has meant more to me than I ever expected when I started. And what I've realized over these first 100 episodes is that this space works best when it feels like real life. When it's not perfect, when I don't have a script and things aren't figured out yet, and when we're all just paying attention to what's happening and honestly just trying to understand things a little better as we go along. You guys, I'm so grateful that this has become a place where I can do that out loud. And I'm grateful that you've chosen to be here for it. So thank you, truly. And let's see where the next 100 go. Well, listening back to that now, I keep returning to the question I asked at the time. What comes next? The honest answer is that what came next wasn't one perfectly planned chapter. It was more conversation, more experimentation, and more moments when real life quietly became more interesting than anything I could have ever manufactured for the podcast. Since episode 100, I've talked with remarkable women about business, courage, reinvention, family, and what success actually looks like behind the polished version. I've also talked about ordinary life, grandchildren, friendships, responsibility, getting older, taking care of ourselves, paying attention, and learning that a meaningful life does not always arrive with a dramatic headline. Somewhere along the way, I stopped feeling as though every episode had to prove something. The podcast became less about finding the perfect category and more about noticing what was already worth talking about, what was happening in real life. Listening back, I can hear that episode 100 wasn't really the answer, but it was a doorway. I didn't know exactly what the next 100 episodes would look like, and I still don't. But I know the show is at its best when I'm just being honest about where I am or curious about where other people are and willing to let life lead the conversation. That may actually be the biggest thing the first 100 episodes taught me. Growth doesn't always mean becoming something completely different. Sometimes it means becoming more fully yourself. I'd love to know what you have enjoyed most about the evolution of the Living on the Verge podcast and what you hope we'll explore next. Thank you for going back into the vault with me. And until next time, I'll be right here, living on the verge.